a.m. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll, please?
Good morning, everyone. We'll start with Director Garbarino.
Here.
Giudice. Hill.
Here.
Rodoni.
Here.
Stephanie is absent. Vice Chair Snyder.
Present.
Chair Cochran.
Here.
And President Terrio.
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum and you are a committee of the whole. Also in the room, we have Directors Grosboll, Hernandez, Moulton Peters, Parr, and Rabbit. So thank you and welcome, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for being here this morning. This morning we have Mr. Bo Beeler from our Platinum Advisor, our legislative advocate. Bo, welcome to San Francisco again. Hadn't seen you for a while.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, Mr. Chairman, directors. Appreciate it. It's great to be back. I was noticing earlier, I think the walls have changed a little bit. It's a little brighter in here. But it's great to be back. I'm Bo Biller with Platinum Advisors. I meant to check on the way down, but I think we've been your lobbyist in Sacramento for about 12 years, 10 years, somewhere thereabouts. Always a great feeling of pride to represent the iconic bridge. And thanks for having me down. You've received our report in writing. I'm one that likes to kind of take questions as they come. If you've got something you want to ask me, I'd love to get into some of the insider stuff that's going on. We can put things in writing, but if you want to hear some of the inside, please feel free to ask. Of course, one of the exciting things happening right now, we've got a new speaker, and he's made his changes in the assembly, some of which I think were probably expected. It's an interesting transition for the speakership. He basically was speaker in waiting for about 6 months and haven't been in the legislative world for a long time. Usually if you've got the votes, you take them. If you want to bank those for 6 months, it's unlikely they're going to stick around and be there for you that far out, but it worked. So Speaker Rivas has taken the helm and I think made some, in my opinion, some changes which are going to be different than our prior speaker and how Speaker Rendon ran the operation. Speaker Rendon was known for giving an immense amount of power to his committee chairs to allow them controlled policy. If you think back, going way back to Willie Brown days, things that were speakerized or things, there was a lot more of an imprint from the speaker's office. I think, in my opinion, I've seen this already from the new speaker, Speaker Rivas, especially dealing with some of the issues around the Assembly Assembly Public Safety Committee and things that had been held up in there. There was at the end of session, I would have never thought it, but a Republican senator from Bakersfield, Shannon Grove, had a lightning rod issue dealing with sex trafficking, which was bottled up in committee. The new speaker basically unwound it, forced a vote of reconsideration, which I haven't seen in a long time. And the chair of that committee had to reconvene his hearing, open it up, and cast a vote in favor of a bill that clearly he had no interest in allowing out of that committee. So just to give you a little flavor from the inside, that's how I see a little bit of a change in this new speakership. Of course, he's named new leadership. I always try to focus to the extent I can on the delegation and then by extension the Bay Area delegation, which I think we want to spend the most time with, although the bridge obviously internationally iconic. Everybody loves it, but when it comes to asking for some money and some favors, we probably are going to kind of put the arm on our Bay Area delegation and those that are closest to us. But you do have Jim Wood is going to be running the meetings in the assembly, but he's also announced that he's done. So I won't go into all the folks that are running for it, but you've got people that have thrown their hats in, and we'll see how that shakes out. And then also in our delegation, you've got Aguilar Curry, who is going to be acting as the majority leader. And Cecilia, she's got one of my favorite chiefs of staff with John Ferrer, is a great guy, and they are easy for us to get to and make our case with them. So that's good news. And then another delegation member, Matt Haney, who Matt Haney is great. He's going to be a friend of our office and obviously right here, part of the bridge operation, which is excellent. And then those that I would say can see the bridge from their backyard with Buffy Wicks and Lori Wilson. getting powerful appointments to appropriations and transportation committee. So these things, I think, all bode very well. Not to mention, you've got the Senator McGuire moving in as pro tem in the Senate, I think February 5th or thereabouts. We're going to go ahead and have him put in. He did secure his votes before dragging it out, but the transition itself, February 5th. But I recently found my way onto this Twitter thing, or X, which I resisted for a long time. But I see that McGuire is already all around the state and making sure he's touching all the right people. And he's a great guy. And I've been a huge friend and a champion for the bridge. And I think as we're looking this year to get the monies out of the state, now that the feds have more than done their part in this deal, it's time for the state to step up. We have been banging some heads for a while, but I think now's the time with Assemblymember Ting and with McGuire. Hopefully we can make that thing happen and get those matching funds and get the seismic retrofit rolling. I know that Dennis has got things coming up. I'll let him speak to when those are happening, but we are here to support and help move that along. Let's see. One thing of interest, in fact, the list just came out, but I'm not going to read it all in the interest of time, but legislation last year in SB 125 created a task force through CalSTA, which is going to dig deeply into transit. And I think the first meeting might be December 19th coming up. That's next week. So we'll see. Keep an eye on that. I think they're required within a year or thereabouts to start thinking about a report. And in 25, they need to publish something back to the legislature. And that could talk about things like ferry consolidation. So we want to keep a very close eye on things like that. It's going to have everything to do with fares and tolls and transit, buses, and everything that goes into that. So we'll put that high on the list to keep track of. A couple of, let's see, here in this session, we talked about him already. Let's see, let's move on to a couple of the bills of interest that happened this last year. Other than maybe perhaps from the bridge perspective, watching giant wind turbine blades go underneath the bridge, I'm not sure how much of interest offshore wind is, but I think it's worth knowing what's going on. So this last year, McGuire ran a bill, SB 286, which created a working group and a kind of a roadmap of all the federal, state, local jurisdictions which have a say in how you develop offshore wind. The feds in the state have authorized leases off Humboldt and I think San Luis Obispo, Paso Robles, somewhere down there. And kind of a little herky-jerky in the start. Some of the offshore wind folks, given what's going on the East Coast, have gotten cold feet, backed out of a couple of leases. But the state critical was AB 1373, which allows I think it's the Department of Water Resources to guarantee a rate so that once you do stand up these billion-dollar farms, or if and when you stand them up, that you would be guaranteed to have a customer in the state to purchase those electrons. I mean, the infrastructure that would go into this, the commercial fishing interests, which is the working group created by McGuire's bill, what happens on the land side, and in fact, in the case of Humboldt, I think you have to update the transmission once you do get the power out of federal waters into the state. Then I think you've got to build the conduit out to get from Humboldt to the rest of the system. So it's really complicated, but McGuire is taking that on, and with that companion bill, it's slated it can move forward. Ocean Protection Council has a big say in the working group, and but I keep a close eye on that. Again, I'm not sure exactly how directly it relates, but it's definitely a big deal, and so we'll keep an eye on that for you. I don't think that climate reporting bill is of that much interest. There were a couple of, every year it seems there's always an effort to promote alternative fuels and mobility. Certainly on the transportation side, you'll hear over and over again that in excess of 50% of our pollution is created by on-road sources, trucks, buses, cars. And so we're always looking at efforts to incentivize all fuels for transit, even ferry, bus. There was a tax break measure last year for zero emission public transit ferries. Didn't make it, but we'll find out. And then, in fact, that was authored by our incoming transportation chair, Lori Wilson. So we'll touch her and see if she's got an interest in pursuing that. Now, before I even go any further, I did have this up over here. Now the LAO, this is unfortunately the written memo we sent you is a little dated. It's not a $40 billion projected budget shortfall, it's $68 billion projected budget shortfall, which has triggered a budget letter from the Department of Finance, which is now telling all state agencies and departments that they are to cease and desist on any new contracts related to IT or other, buying supplies, copiers, any hardware. They are going to limit travel, which may be of interest for state folks to go to conferences and all sorts of things. So that budget letter is, unless it's essential or it's critical, they do want to start reining in some spending. But I will say last year we were faced with a $30 billion deficit. And to my count, we still handed out, when I say we, the state handed out about $1 billion in member projects, fire stations, dog parks, member requests around the state. So if you just cut those member requests in half, since our budget deficit has doubled, it's not like it's not the end of the world, but with this budget letter, we didn't get one of those last year. So I think the state is definitely going to take it more seriously. If nothing else, it's an excuse for the government to resist requests for money. But we are going to pursue and get our best with that. I feel like I've been talking for quite a while. You want me to take a break, Mr. Chairman?
Have a couple things you'd like to add.
First, I can't thank Bo and his colleague Steve Wallach enough for their advocacy on our behalf. The money we're seeking from the state on the seismic is non-general fund monies, so that's a good thing when times are tough. We think have an offer now that will run some legislation if it's necessary, but we've had a lot of conversations. We'll be meeting with Senator McGuire next week to talk about it. So that's all positive and encouraging. We're very fortunate that the bridge sells well. So we like to show the bridge to our elected officials that can help us. And so the Bay Area Caucus had a meeting in January at nearby at Cavallo. And so we did take the legislators and their wives on a behind the scenes tour of the bridge, not to the top of the tower, but even better parts of the bridge. And we'll be doing another tour this coming January for the legislators and their spouses so that they can enjoy it. And so that we think is something that we can offer that, it also gives us an opportunity when they're in some space that they can't leave until they hear the pitch because they're kind of trapped. So we use what we have at our avail, and we'll continue to do that, but we have good relationships with the legislators. The other thing I would add is that the incoming chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee, Assembly Member Wilson, she is a phenomenal ferry advocate, and so that is a good thing for waterborne transit on the Bay. She's also a big transit advocate, and she's obviously someone who has a keen equity eye as she views policy issues, and so we're very fortunate to have her in that role. So I just thought I'd offer those things, and that our primary focus in Sacramento is getting money and making sure that people don't do bad things to us.
Okay, other members and directors have questions of Bo? Chris?
Yeah, I just really appreciate the report, very thorough. A lot of the things that I've been seeing too. The offshore wind, I know it doesn't totally affect us directly, but it is an exciting project that I've got to work on a little bit too. So we're trying to build. I think these things are 700 feet tall, 150 or so, a baseball or a football field and a half wide, and the platforms they sit on are 6 football fields, and a lot of it's under the Jones Act and stuff. So we need like $13 billion in port infrastructure and development. So there's really exciting opportunities for port development, and hopefully it relates to dredging and everything else, and actually kind of home sourcing some of the even like looking at Mare Island and stuff like that to try to, kind of, because it's got to be the whole supply chain up and down the coast. So I think they're going to float them out of Humboldt because we can't fit them under our bridge because they're so tall. But yeah, it's really exciting. So thank you for your insights on that.
Yeah. Thank you. Director Hill.
Yeah, just a question. I'm reading that there are problems relative to the tribes and some of the boundary areas up there. Is that going to be a big factor in delaying the project?
For the offshore wind?
Yeah.
So they're part of the working group. So what McGuire did is they kind of bifurcated it. So the one bill that's listed in here talks about having a place to buy the electrons when they happen. The other side of the equation, the McGuire bill deals with all of the expanse of the stakeholders. So you have labor, the tribal folks, you've got the fishing community in various different iterations. And so they will all have a piece of the seat at the table during the working group. But it's going to get really complicated because meanwhile, at the same time, you have the governor's initiative on 30 by 30, which is to conserve 30% of our waters and lands by the year, well, it's coming up, 2030. And that keeps changing to 50% by 50. And, these numbers, I'm not sure why we always pick these arbitrary dates that fit on press releases really nice, but it is what it is and it's coming. So, and in protecting those marine protected areas and some of I think what you're referring to is like the tribal protected areas, the Ocean Protection Council will probably be the lead that deals with that. They just had their first meeting last week, Tuesday, I believe, the working group. So the co-chairs are Holly from Ocean Protection Council and I think his name's Fina, and he's with Seafood Processor Fishing Operation. And it's got a bunch of the tribal communities and labor and others all sit on this working group. So that's the first of I don't know how many meetings they'll have, but that's not kind of a non-answer to your question, but that's where they'll fuss with it.
That's something. It's very germane though, because California wants to electrify transportation. That's going to take a lot more electricity. And so it's vital that these large, transmission and these large generation projects come to fruition. Otherwise, California will not be able to achieve its climate goals. And so that's why it's so important. And what most people don't realize is California has more Native American citizens than any other state in the United States. And the member of Congress who has the most tribes in their congressional district is Congressman Jared Huffman. And it's a very important key stakeholder group in terms of how the giant extension cords get from where they come ashore to where people need the power, and how we do that in a way that does not cause additional harm to those communities.
Good. Bo, just the gas taxes indicated that it's going to drop by about $6 billion this year. How do you think that's going to affect transit as a whole? Do you have some?
The $6 billion wasn't this year; it's over many years.
Oh, it's over many years.
Yeah, as more Californians electrify their personal transportation, the amount of revenue generated by the gas tax will decline, and so that is a long-term policy issue, not too long-term actually, that needs to be addressed in Sacramento as well as nationally.
Okay.
I do think, Mr. Chairman, I was talking with Steve yesterday. I believe there's about $1 billion that was appropriated but not allocated last year. That's supposed to be for transit purposes, which, given the budget deficit, may be in peril. So I would imagine that the transit community will be lining up to protect that allocation.
I see that. David smiling over there.
Yeah, you know. What else? I think I might know, but we have this huge deficit, but the rainy day fund, which is great that Brown got all that in. How much is in there? 30, 40?
I'm not sure exactly how much, but similar to the way I'm looking at it, if we had a $40 billion deficit last year and we were somehow able to find $1 billion to hand out for things, I can't imagine seeing. I think we'll do is $300 billion is going to get spent one way or another. And I'm not sure there may be no new programs. I will check and see what our rainy day fund looks like, but I have a feeling that when it's all said and done, they will move enough things around that it's not going to be even though that budget letter sounds pretty dire, I'm not so sure things are going to change all that much.
Any other questions by board members? Oh, thank you, Bo. We appreciate the overview that you've given us. Uh, Now Dennis is going to kind of go through our next year's suggested legislative platform.
Thank you, Chair Cochran, members of the committee. The next item, agenda item 4, is to approve the implementation of our 2024 legislative platform. This platform is for state and for federal activities. We're represented by Paul Schlesinger in Washington, D.C., who I think some of you know because he also represents some of our North Bay colleagues, particularly water and transportation issues. Looking ahead, though, we have some financial challenges coming out of the pandemic. That's not new. We're appreciative of all the federal assistance we've received thus far. We're appreciative of the money we received through MTC quite recently as part of Senate Bill 125, but that we have more work to do. So making sure that the state doesn't take back the money that MTC just allocated over that multi-year award, as Bo just mentioned, will be something that we'll be focused on. The other primary focus, we received $400 million from the federal government as part of a nationwide discretionary program for our seismic retrofit. So we do need to finalize the funding with the state piece. And so we think we have an author and we are lining up the support for that. But that'll be our biggest focus next year. It's important to remember, if you meet with elected officials and you ask for 3 things, they'll give you one. So if you say, can you get us appointed to this new committee they're creating? Can you give us $1 million here or $200 million there? They'll appoint you to the committee and say, we took care of you. So it's important that when you have a big ask that you maintain your focus and that you don't dilute your message, because if you do it at the peril of the organization. And so in Sacramento, the $250 million is our primary ask. Obviously, we'll be tracking other bills and focus on those, particularly bills such as the Wilson legislation that would remove the sales tax for electric ferries, which is analogous to something that prior Assembly Member Mullen authored for buses. And so there's lots of issues that we'll be working with our fellow agencies on, but that our primary big focus in Sacramento is that ask of Sacramento for seismic funding. We're asking for $50 million a year for 5 years from the Caltrans Local Bridge Program. That program is oversubscribed, so we have a strategy to shift money from another program into that so they could afford our ask as well as help other people in that program. On a federal level, though, transportation funding, staying on top of the trends, making sure the federal government funds transit at the levels they authorize in the bipartisan infrastructure law is vital. Congress is working on a Water Resources Development Act. The district has a long-term goal, if possible, to convert the Larkspur Ferry Channel to a federal channel, so it would be a core obligation to dredge it. Many years ago, then Senator Boxer, who was chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee at the time, introduced funding through an appropriations bill for the Corps to dredge one cycle. As part of that, they did a benefit cost analysis that showed it passed muster for a federal activity. So we're trying to get the Corps to do a benefit cost analysis on it. In a prior award, we got that language inserted, but they haven't done it yet. So now we need to prod them to do that. So as part of the Water Resources Development Act legislation coming up, we're working with some of our legislative leaders to try to cajole, prod, or force the Corps to do the analysis. Once you become a federal channel, it's not the end-all, be-all. It doesn't mean your channel gets dredged every 5 years. It means you get in the waiting list to beg for money. But it opens another possibility. And that reality where you get in line and beg for money may change in the future. So just having it as a federal channel would give us the flexibility to pursue that path. Recent dredging episodes we have funded with 80% Federal Transit Administration funds and 20% full match. But if we were to federalize the channel and get others, the Corps to dredge it, that would free up that 80% of that money for other transit projects here at the district. And so that's why this is something that's a long-term strategic goal. Then we'll continue to monitor security issues. The feds have done a great job in the last couple of years of tidying up the drone universe. But many years ago, we advocated for registration of drones, for tracking of drones and other things because we're having issues. The amount of issues we're seeing at the bridge associated with drones has declined, but we still have occasional issues. On the state level, there's a lot going on. We want to have the ability to monitor any legislation dealing with tolling, particularly as it pertains to personally identifiable information, because that's an opportunity for class action lawsuits that can be quite problematic. So we want to make sure if there's legislation that doesn't affect that. We also want to track bicycle safety, pedestrian safety legislation. We want to monitor any pension reform legislation. It's been quiet in Sacramento since Pepper passed in 2012 and took effect on January 1, 2013. But with the state being broke, there may be legislators that look at that again to see if they want to do a little bit more there. And then, as always, we work with our sister agencies, the California Transit Association and the other toll operators. And if there's legislative efforts that are underway that are going to raise everyone's vote, so to speak, we want to be a party to that. So we do ask for general authorization so that if a bill comes up, we don't have to call an emergency meeting. We have the authority that we can write a letter of support and we can testify and have Bo or Steve show up. So there's a lot in there, but basically it's to give us running room, and it's consistent, we believe, with your mission and your priorities and your efforts. And so staff respectfully request that you approve the legislative platform so we can proceed as we have in prior years. And with that, I'm available to answer any questions.
Any questions by board members? Chris?
Just, so like the dredging federalization of that channel, what does it cost? How often do we dredge it? And what's it cost generally?
It's about every 5 years. The cost is tied to the disposal option. We were fortunate. I don't know how Abe and her team did it the last cycle because it did not all go deep ocean disposal. We did have some in-bay disposal. But the cost of your disposal is how far you push the barge and whether you have to pay a tipping fee for upland reuse. So the price has gone up dramatically over the last few years, but it's every 5 years. And your last episode, Ava, was about what, 16 million, I think?
Yeah, if you think about it from a passenger perspective, it costs us a certain amount to move a passenger. It's a couple bucks to move. We have to pay a couple bucks to the channel to move every single passenger. It's a lot.
So I mean, it would save us about $3 million a year.
Yeah. But that number's going to keep going up because in the future it'll be more upland reuse. The upland reuse sites that are permitted are pretty far away.
Mm-hmm.
So you put it on the barge and you're pushing it 50 miles to Montezuma. That's a lot of the expense.
Does that money come from how much of that tolls and how much of that?
So the prior episodes, other than that one episode in 2001, were done with 80% Federal Transit Administration formula money and 20% tolls. So the 16 million, 20% or 3.2 million were tolls, and that was a 5-year since our prior episode. I'm looking back, was 16 million the right amount? Yes, Ava.
Right, I think one important thing is that this is quite weather dependent.
Yeah.
So this last cycle, because of the rainfall that happened prior to this exercise, there was a lot of material that had to be disposed. Right. So during dry years, it's less, but we don't like droughts.
So anyway, so it's something that it's a good strategic thing for us long term to pay attention to, and we've made progress slowly. But it's something that we'll be talking to folks when we're in DC a little bit about. And obviously, we thank them for the $400 million every opportunity to get.
Director Gabarino, did you have something?
I just wanted to add what a phenomenal platform. This is very comprehensive, and the explanation behind it, beyond educational, it was really great. Thank you.
Kudos to Amarette. She's my partner in crime in crafting this, to give credit where credit's due.
Of course, and that's very gracious. Thank you.
Director Abbott.
I appreciate the discussion on the dredging because there was interesting conversations going on in Petaluma River down in San Rafael over into the Napa area regarding with our federal legislature. Those are federally qualified, or they qualify for the Army Corps dredging. Of course, that doesn't mean that you're going to get the dredging. I think the last cycle, instead of being 5, was
San Rafael tilted up.
Yeah, it was 13 years, I think. So you're waiting. At the same time, the suggestion was made by one of our legislators that we should form a public-private partnership, purchase a dredge equipment, and then have it rotate throughout, which I don't think would be a good idea.
From a business perspective, dredging is a very capital-intensive industry. And if you spend a lot of money on that equipment, you need to use it all the time.
Exactly.
To make it cost effective. And I'm not sure there's enough dredging in that area because we had he approached us and we have a 500,000 cubic yards that we do every 4, 5, 6 years. But I don't think it would pencil out. But it is an interesting idea. It's great to throw out ideas. I also think that it would upset the local private market in a way that would be somewhat destructive almost to it. And so I think that's something you always want to do. Government, needs to be careful before it puts private businesses out of business. And I'm sure Director Snyder, since
Yeah, I mean, we have two of the largest dredge contractors based out of, one out of Santa Fe, Dutra, and then Manson's based out of Richmond in the world. I mean, these guys are dredging in Dubai, and it is, I don't know. Yeah, I agree completely.
I knew you were part of that conversation. I just wanted to make sure that we know that's out there, because I think that's a horrible idea to give up a federal responsibility, take it on locally when, as you said, the economics of that just do not work.
Any other board members have comments? All right, I need a motion to approve our
I did have one more question, and maybe more to Director Rabbit is, so the MTC, I mean, I've heard rumors and I've heard some draft stuff that you guys may float a regional bond measure this year through the legislature. Is that to fund transit agencies like ourselves? Is there any truth to that?
they did polling.
Yeah, the polling was, Dennis was there, so he can speak to it as well. The polling came out last Friday, basically says probably not a good idea. It's been an interesting conversation just on the transit side, if I may, Dennis, talking about trying to get the state to step up and actually, put more money in the game. What it meant, part of the deal that was struck this last year in order to stave off the fiscal cliff, as it were, which is only a fiscal cliff for a few agencies, to be honest, out of the 27 that are in the Bay Area, because the ones that are financed like SMART from sales tax did great because sales tax went up. The ones that are like BART or here at the bridge because of tolls that was relying on and got impacted by the pandemic, not so good. And so there's lots of conversations that took place up in Sacramento regarding the future of transit, what that looks like. And truth be told, transit was soft, if not declining, prior to the pandemic. And so people also believe this is an opportunity to re-envision what that means. A lot of it has to do with the kind of the seamless approach of fare integration, wayfinding, transfers, and all that stuff, which I think we all recognize would be good customer service. How far up, through consolidation do you go? Is 27 the right number in the Bay Area for transit agencies? Probably not. You'd never design it that way, but there's a reason it was. And part of it was because the state never participated over the years. Everyone kicked in their own local money in different ways and different measures. And unraveling that would be a mess, to say the least. But there is interesting perspectives in Sacramento about what the additional future participation would be. So yes, the polling was done by EMC. People are grumpy. 62%, I think, believe the Bay Area is heading in the wrong direction, not the right direction. That's kind of a high. There was about 50. It's like between 51 and 55% on the different ways that you can go about whether it's income tax, payroll tax, or sales tax, but certainly not to the 2/3. And it was envisioned to be in 26, because there's a housing.
Would it be fair to say the only way we'd have a chance to get it to pass would be if ACA 1 passes?
So ACA 1 is something sponsored by Assemblymember Cecilia Aguilar Curry, and it gets into how it ultimately is written when it's passed. Does it apply to transportation or not? So that's one issue. Another issue is how something gets on the ballot. If something gets on the ballot by signatures, then you have a lower threshold. And so there may be some strategies for that. We're fortunate we have two of our board members who sit on the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. So I don't know if Director Stephanie Moulton-Peters wishes to offer any insights.
Way down here, I think David gave an excellent summary of it. The initial polling is a little bleak. Coming in with just 50% in favor means a long way to go.
One last thing, if I may, I think our transit advocates want, I'll use round numbers, but $1 billion a year gets you back to status quo. But I think a lot of people believe that status quo is not where we want to be. We want to do something better. So our transit advocates would like $2 billion. That doesn't go well in the face of. It's interesting because I think roughly 50% of the people polled never take transit, but they think it's very bad. So they have a strong opinion in the negative, but they never have taken it. Those that do take it regularly probably more apt to be in favor, but that's always a dilemma, I think, on the transit world going forward. There is, again, this idea that you probably, I don't think it shows up in the polling per se. There was some questions, but it would take a significant kind of generational shift to push it over the top to have it pass. What that means, I think, is up for the big discussion, and Dennis will probably add to that.
There's also big challenges about how do you pay for it, because different groups feel different revenue sources, the ones that don't affect them, are the most appropriate. So the business community thinks, well, why don't we do a sales tax increase? And advocates for the underrepresented groups say that that's a regressive tax. It's the wrong thing to do. Why don't we do a payroll tax? And so everyone always says, well, why don't you tax this other group? And so that all has to be sorted out. In all likelihood, what MTC will probably do is they'll probably get the authority to go to the legislature to ask the legislature to give them the authority to take something to the voters from any of these different pots of money to kind of kick that down the road, that can down the road, so they don't have to upset someone yet, get the authority, then sit down with folks to see if they can come up with something. The two biggest fiscal cliffs are BART and Muni. So there's some issues there. BART has some reputational challenges because people have seen stories about BART. And so that does kind of, for those that don't ride transit, paints your perception of transit must be unsafe. I assure you our customers don't have that perception, but it is out there. And then the other issue is, Muni has a big hole, but if you raise revenues, what's the return to source on that? That's kind of a key policy issue that Sacramento wants to fix this problem, but it'll make it tough because, folks in Solano County probably don't want to pay a tax or a toll to subsidize Muni. And it gets into issues of, representation and taxation. And so it will be complicated. The good news is the legislature wants to have those conversations. The advocates wants to have those conversations, and MTC wants to have those conversations. And just because something's tough doesn't mean it won't ultimately happen. But we shouldn't hold our breath and be relying upon manna from heaven coming to us in the form of some new regional measure in 2024 or 2026, or if it happens, it's great. But I think we need to we need to accept the fact that there's a lot of things we can't control, and what we can't control, we need to manage very, very well.
Okay, Patty.
Yes, just one final thought. I do believe that, as we've discussed at the Smart Board, these things are cyclical and perhaps generational. And thank you, David, for mentioning that. I know Sabrina and Stephanie and I were talking just a bit about generational changes coming that I think Pollyanna here are positive. I know, getting back to the Smart Board, we've talked a lot about how the next generation does want mass transit. It behooves us, it's incumbent upon us to provide those options for them. So Pollyanna, again, hopefully polling in the next several years, perhaps 5, will bring up that generation who I also believe are going to reverse the ill effects of climate change. So there you have it. I think we need to have hope. Thank you. And the responsibility that that's what they want and get that for them.
Thank you all for your comments. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comments?
We have no speakers on this. No
Okay.
speakers on item 3 or 4.
Okay. Now, I do need a motion to approve the implementation of our 2024 legislative platform. Do I hear a motion? Who made the motion? Okay. Oh, over here. I'm pretty fast. Madam Secretary, we do call the roll, please.
Okay. We have time for the roll. Thank you. We're voting on item number 4. We'll start with Director Conroy, since we're committee of the whole, who's absent. Dorsey is absent, and Guardia is absent. Garbarino?
Aye.
Judice?
Yes.
Croswell?
Yes.
Hernandez? Maston is absent. Moulton Peters?
Aye.
Parr?
Aye.
Rabbit?
Aye.
Verdoni?
Aye.
Safai is absent. Snyder?
Aye.
Stephanie is absent. Thier is absent. Second Vice President Hill?
Yes.
First Vice President Cochran?
Yes.
And President Terrio?
Yes.
Thank you. It's unanimous.
Okay. There's no public comment. Is there, I'll accept a motion to adjourn then. Oh, Bo has something.
One last thing, the answer to the question from Director Snyder, it's about 26 billion in the rainy day fund. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Not gonna get us there.
Have another 8.
You need a second. You do it first.
Who seconded?
Give me a second for adjournment.
Someone did.
There we go. We can end the meeting.
Sure.
Okay, 9:04, got it.